The gunshots echoed through the canyon as Hannah Jenkins ducked behind a boulder, her heart pounding against her ribs so fiercely she feared it might burst. Her once pristine blue calico dress was now stained with dirt and blood not her own, thank heavens, but that of her father who lay buried miles back along the trail. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched her father's pocket watch, the only possession she had managed to salvage before fleeing the ranch. Wyoming Territory, 1875. What had begun as a peaceful life on their small homestead had turned into a nightmare when the Blackwell Gang came calling. They wanted the land, something about a gold vein her father had unknowingly been sitting on for years. When he refused to sell, they didn't negotiate further. They simply took. Hannah wiped her tears with the back of her hand, smearing dirt across her cheek. The sound of approaching horses made her press tighter against the rock face. She'd been running for 2 days, hiding during daylight, moving under the cover of darkness. But exhaustion was taking its toll. Her water had run out hours ago, and the last of her jerky was gone by sunrise. "Check the ridge," a gruff voice called out. "Boss says she couldn't have gotten far." Hannah closed her eyes, trying to quiet her breathing. 3 men from the Blackwell Gang had been trailing her since dawn. If they found her, she knew what fate awaited. The gang's reputation with women was as vile as their penchant for violence. The crunch of boots on gravel grew closer. Hannah reached for the small knife tucked in her boot, her father's last gift to her. "Always keep it close," he'd said. "The world ain't always kind to a woman alone." A shadow fell across the ground near her hiding spot. Hannah tightened her grip on the knife, her knuckles turning white. "Nothing over here," the voice called out, moving away. "Let's head back to the creek." She might have doubled back. Hannah waited until the sounds of their horses faded before she allowed herself to breathe normally again. She slumped against the rock, utterly spent. The adrenaline that had kept her moving was draining away, leaving only bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. Night was falling, and with it came the bitter cold of the high country. Hannah knew she couldn't remain where she was. The gang would be back at first light, and she needed to put more distance between them. Staggering to her feet, she began to walk, no destination in mind except away. The moon rose high, casting silver light across the landscape. Hannah stumbled forward, her legs leaden with fatigue. Each step was an act of will. In the distance, a faint glow caught her eye, a campfire. It could be the gang, or it could be salvation. At this point, she had little choice but to investigate. Moving slowly, she approached the light. As she drew nearer, she could make out a solitary figure sitting by the fire, his back against a fallen log, hat pulled low over his face. A single horse was tethered nearby, contentedly munching on sparse grass. Hannah hesitated at the edge of the firelight. One man alone was better odds than the gang, but that didn't mean he was safe. In these parts, a man traveling alone often had reasons for avoiding company. As if sensing her presence, the figure raised his head. "You might as well come into the light," he said, his voice deep and steady. "Been listening to you shuffle around out there for the past 5 minutes." Hannah stepped forward reluctantly, knife still clutched in her hand but hidden in the folds of her skirt. The man studied her, taking in her torn dress, the dirt on her face, the wild look in her eyes. He didn't seem surprised by her disheveled appearance. "You running from something, miss?" Hannah nodded, not trusting her voice, figured as much. He gestured to a spot across the fire. "Sit. I've got coffee and beans, not much of a feast, but it's hot." Hannah remained standing, wary. "How do I know I can trust you?" The man shrugged. "You don't." "Same as I don't know I can trust you, but you look like you're about to fall over, and I was raised not to let a lady collapse if I could help it." She studied him more carefully. He was lean but solid, with broad shoulders and strong hands that spoke of hard work. His face was partially shadowed by his hat, but she could see a strong jawline covered in several days' worth of stubble. He wore typical cowboy attire, denim pants, a worn shirt, leather vest, and boots that had seen many miles. "What's your name?" Hannah asked, still not moving closer. "Quentin." "Quentin Zachary. Most folks just call me Zach." He poured coffee into a tin cup and held it out to her. "And you are Hannah Jenkins." She finally moved closer, accepting the cup with shaking hands. The warmth seeped into her cold fingers immediately. "Well, Miss Jenkins, whatever trouble you're in, it won't get solved tonight. Might as well rest while you can." Hannah sank down onto a blanket he pushed toward her, the exhaustion finally overwhelming her caution. The coffee was bitter and strong, but it was the first warm thing she'd had in days. She gulped it down gratefully. "The Blackwell Gang," she said after a moment, her voice barely above a whisper. "They killed my father, tried to take our land, been chasing me for 2 days." Quentin's expression darkened. Blackwell should have known. He set his own cup down. "They've been terrorizing this territory for months now. Law can't seem to catch up to them. They want our land, said there's gold." Hannah's voice broke. "My father wouldn't sell, so they shot him. Right in front of me." The tears came again, unbidden and unstoppable. A woman wept quietly with her head low. A cowboy sat in silence until she rested against him. Quentin didn't offer words of comfort. What could he say that would matter? Instead, he moved beside her and simply allowed her to lean against his shoulder as the grief poured out. When her sobs finally subsided, Hannah realized she was pressed against a stranger, her face buried in his vest. She pulled back, embarrassed. "I'm sorry." "I don't usually, no need to apologize," Quentin said, his voice gentle. "Grief's a heavy burden to carry alone." He offered her a plate of beans and a piece of hardtack. "Eat, then sleep. I'll keep watch." Hannah wanted to protest, to maintain some semblance of propriety, but hunger won out. She ate quickly, barely tasting the food. When she finished, Quentin handed her his bedroll. "Take it," he said when she hesitated. "I'll be up anyway." Hannah was too exhausted to argue. She wrapped herself in the blanket, inhaling the scent of leather, horses, and something distinctly male. It should have made her uncomfortable. Instead, she found it oddly comforting. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her eyes already growing heavy. Quentin stared into the fire, his profile strong against the flames. "Let's just say I know what it's like to lose everything." "Get some rest, Miss Jenkins. Morning comes early out here." Hannah wanted to ask more questions, but sleep claimed her before she could form the words. Quentin watched her sleeping form for a long while. He'd been riding alone for months, avoiding towns and people, keeping to himself. Now he had a woman in his camp, one being hunted by the most notorious gang in the territory. He should send her on her way come morning. It wasn't his fight, and yet, looking at her tear-stained face, finally peaceful in sleep, he knew he wouldn't. Something about Hannah Jenkins stirred protective instincts he'd thought long dead. He added wood to the fire and settled back against the log, rifle across his lap, eyes scanning the darkness beyond the camp. For the first time in a long while, Quentin Zachary had someone other than himself to worry about. The realization didn't trouble him as much as it should have. Dawn broke with a palette of pinks and golds spreading across the eastern sky. Hannah stirred, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The events of the previous days came rushing back, bringing with them a fresh wave of grief, but also the strange comfort of knowing she wasn't alone. Quentin was already up, tending to his horse, a magnificent buckskin gelding. He moved with the easy grace of a man comfortable in his own skin, strong hands working quickly to brush down the animal. "Good morning," Hannah said, her voice rough from sleep and tears. Quentin turned, nodding. "Morning, coffee's hot if you want some." Hannah poured herself a cup from the pot nestled in the coals. "Thank you for everything," he shrugged off her gratitude. "Where were you headed before you ran into me?" Hannah stared into her coffee. "I don't know, away. I have an aunt in Denver, but that's hundreds of miles from here." "Denver?" Quentin considered this. "That's a long ride through dangerous country, especially for a woman alone." "I don't have much choice," Hannah replied. "I can't go back home. They'll be waiting." Quentin seemed to be wrestling with something. Finally, he said, "I'm headed south myself. Could escort you part of the way." Hannah studied him. In the clear light of morning, she could see him better. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30 or so. His eyes were a striking blue against his sun-darkened skin, and there was a scar that ran along his jawline. He wasn't conventionally handsome, but there was something compelling about his features, a strength and steadiness that put her at ease. "Why would you do that? You don't know me." No, I don't, he agreed, but I know Blackwell, man's a rattlesnake, leaves nothing but death in his wake. His expression hardened. Let's just say I've got my own reasons for not wanting to see him succeed. Hannah sensed there was more to the story, but she didn't press. I don't have any money to pay you, not asking for payment. Quentin began packing up his camp. Just headed in the same direction is all. Hannah knew it was more than that, but she was in no position to refuse help. Thank you, Mr. Zachary. Zach, he corrected. Mr. Zachary was my father and he's long gone. Hannah nodded, finishing her coffee and helping to break camp. Within half an hour, they were ready to ride. Quentin helped her up onto his horse, then swung up behind her. Hannah stiffened at the proximity. It was highly improper for a lady to ride this way with a man who wasn't her husband or family. But then again, so was spending the night at his camp unchaperoned. Propriety seemed a luxury she could no longer afford. Relax, Quentin said, sensing her discomfort. It's a long ride, no sense in making it harder than it needs to be. They rode in silence for most of the morning, the rhythm of the horse's gait lulling Hannah into a strange sense of security. Despite her situation, despite everything she'd lost, she found herself grateful for the solid presence of the man behind her. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horse and eat a simple meal of jerky and hardtack. Hannah took the opportunity to wash her face in a small stream, the cold water refreshing against her skin. How did you end up out here alone? She asked Quentin as they rested in the shade of a cottonwood. He was quiet for so long that Hannah thought he might not answer. Was a rancher once, he finally said. Had a small spread near the Powder River, nothing fancy, but it was mine. What happened? Quentin's jaw tightened. Blackwell happened about a year ago. Said my land was perfect for a new rail spur he was investing in. Offered to buy me out for a fraction of what it was worth, when I refused. He trailed off, his gaze distant. He took it anyway, Hannah finished for him. Quentin nodded. Burned me out, lost everything, house, barn, livestock. Been drifting ever since. I'm sorry, Hannah said softly. So am I. Quentin stood, ending the conversation. We should keep moving, want to make it to Miller's Creek by nightfall. They rode through the afternoon, the landscape gradually changing from the rugged foothills to rolling plains dotted with sagebrush. Hannah found herself leaning back against Quentin's chest, exhaustion making it difficult to stay upright. Rest if you need to, he told her. I won't let you fall. Something about the simple promise made Hannah's heart ache. She allowed herself to relax, her head resting against his shoulder. The steady rhythm of his breathing and the horse's movement eventually lulled her into a light doze. She woke with a start when the horse stopped. The sun was lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the land. Ahead, a small collection of buildings marked the settlement of Miller's Creek. Not much of a town, Quentin observed, but they've got a stable and a boarding house. We can get a proper meal and rest for the night. Hannah nodded, suddenly aware of how she must look dirty, disheveled, riding double with a man. They'll talk, she said quietly. Quentin understood her concern immediately. We'll tell them you're my sister, lost your husband recently, we're traveling to family in Denver. The simple lie eased some of Hannah's anxiety. As they rode into town, she was conscious of the curious glances from the few people on the street. Miller's Creek was barely more than a wide spot in the road, a general store, a small saloon, a livery, and the boarding house Quentin had mentioned. They stopped at the livery first. The stableman, an older man with rheumy eyes, took Quentin's horse with a nod. Passing through, he asked, eyeing Hannah with undisguised curiosity. Just for the night, Quentin replied, helping Hannah down. My sister and I are headed to Denver. The man seemed satisfied with this explanation. Boarding house is just down the street. Mrs. Tanner runs it. Tell her Joe sent you. Quentin thanked him, and they walked toward the boarding house, Hannah keeping close to his side. The two-story building was plain but well-maintained, with curtains in the windows and a small garden out front. A plump woman with gray streaked hair answered the door. Can I help you folks? Need a room for the night, Quentin said. 2 if you have them. Joe at the livery sent us. Mrs. Tanner looked them over, her gaze lingering on Hannah's bedraggled appearance. Only got 1 room left, I'm afraid. 2 beds, though. Will that suit? Hannah opened her mouth to object, but Quentin cut in smoothly. That'll be fine. My sister's had a rough journey, lost her husband recently. The woman's expression softened. Oh, you poor dear, come in, come in. You look like you could use a hot meal and a bath. Hannah was too tired to feel guilty about the deception. She followed Mrs. Tanner inside, Quentin close behind. The boarding house was clean and smelled of fresh bread and beeswax. Mrs. Tanner led them to a small but comfortable room on the second floor with 2 narrow beds and a washstand. Dinner's at 6, she told them. And I can have a bath drawn for you, miss, if you'd like. That would be wonderful, thank you, Hannah said, her voice catching at the thought of being clean again. After Mrs. Tanner left, Hannah turned to Quentin. I can't ask you to keep paying for everything. I have nothing to offer in return. Quentin set his saddlebags on one of the beds. Not asking for anything in return, just doing what's right. He pulled out a small pouch and handed it to her. Here, not much, but enough to get you some clean clothes at the general store. Hannah stared at the pouch, then at him. Why are you being so kind to me? Quentin's expression was unreadable. Maybe I'm just tired of seeing Blackwell win. He headed for the door. I'll check around town, see if there's any news about the gang. Get yourself that bath and some rest. Before Hannah could respond, he was gone. She sank onto the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the events of the past few days. Her father was dead. Her home was gone. She was dependent on the kindness of a stranger who had his own score to settle with the men who had destroyed her life. For the first time since fleeing the ranch, Hannah allowed herself to truly feel the weight of her loss. Her father had been everything to her since her mother's death 10 years ago. They'd built their life together, working the land, making plans for the future. Now he was gone, and she was alone. Except she wasn't entirely alone. Quentin Zachary, a man she'd known for less than a day, had shown her more kindness than she could have hoped for. There was something about him, a quiet strength, an unspoken understanding of her pain that gave her comfort. The thought of him brought a flutter to her stomach that had nothing to do with grief or fear. Hannah pushed it aside. Now was not the time for such feelings. She had to focus on survival, on getting to Denver, on building a new life from the ashes of the old. But as she prepared for her bath, Hannah couldn't help but wonder what kind of man Quentin Zachary really was, and why fate had brought him into her life at the exact moment she needed him most. The bath was heavenly. Mrs. Tanner had provided lavender-scented soap and even a clean nightgown and robe that had belonged to her daughter. She's married and moved to Cheyenne now, the woman explained. Won't miss these things. Clean, with her hair washed and combed, Hannah felt almost human again. She made her way downstairs for dinner, finding the small dining room occupied by a few other guests, a traveling salesman, an elderly couple, and Quentin, who stood when she entered. The simple courtesy touched her. Her father had always been a gentleman, insisting on manners even in their rustic life. Seeing Quentin rise for her brought a pang of memory and gratitude. You look much better, he said as she took the seat across from him. I feel better, Hannah admitted. Thank you for the money. I'll pay you back someday. Quentin shook his head. No need. Mrs. Tanner served a hearty meal of beef stew, biscuits, and apple pie. Hannah ate slowly, savoring each bite, aware of Quentin watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Did you learn anything in town? She asked quietly, mindful of the other diners. Quentin leaned closer. Blackwell's men were through here 2 days ago, asking questions. They're looking for you, all right. Hannah's appetite vanished. Do you think anyone recognized me? Don't think so, but we should move on at first light. Head southwest instead of due south. Throw them off our trail. Our trail, Hannah repeated. You're still planning to come with me? Quentin met her gaze steadily. Unless you'd rather I didn't. No, Hannah said quickly. I mean, yes, I'd like you to come. I don't want to be a burden. You're not. His tone left no room for argument. They finished their meal in comfortable silence. As they rose to return to their room, the salesman approached them. Pardon me, he said, his eyes fixed on Hannah. But haven't we met before, perhaps in Cheyenne? Hannah's heart raced. No, sir. I've never been to Cheyenne. The man frowned. Could have sworn. Well, my mistake. Good evening to you both. Quentin placed a protective hand at the small of Hannah's back, guiding her upstairs. Once in their room, he locked the door behind them. He recognized you, Quentin said grimly. Or thought he did, Hannah countered. I've never seen him before. Doesn't matter. Word travels fast in these parts. If he mentions it to someone else who's heard about a woman on the run. He didn't need to finish the thought, so we leave tonight. Hannah asked, already moving to gather her few belongings. Quentin shook his head. Too obvious. We'll leave at dawn as planned, but we need to change your appearance. Hannah touched her hair self-consciously. How? Cut it. Change your clothes. Make you look less like a rancher's daughter and more like... He hesitated. Like what? Like my wife? Hannah stared at him. Your wife, a married couple, draws less attention than a man traveling with his sister, and no one's looking for Quentin Zachary's wife. His expression was pragmatic, but Hannah couldn't help the blush that crept up her cheeks. I suppose that makes sense, she said, trying to match his matter-of-fact tone. Quentin pulled a knife from his boot. I can cut your hair if you want. Used to trim my brother's back when we were kids. Hannah hesitated only briefly before nodding. She sat on the edge of the bed while Quentin moved behind her. Her long brown hair, still damp from the bath, hung down her back in waves. How short? She asked, suddenly nervous. Just below your shoulders should do it, Quentin replied. Different enough to change your appearance, but not so drastic it draws attention. Hannah closed her eyes as she felt him gather her hair in one hand. The knife was sharp, and she heard rather than felt the cutting. A weight lifted from her head as her hair fell away. There, Quentin said, stepping back to examine his work. Not bad. Hannah stood and moved to the small mirror above the washstand. Her reflection startled her. With her hair now falling just past her shoulders, she looked different, older somehow, more serious. The cut framed her face in a way that emphasized her high cheekbones and large green eyes. It's good, she said, surprised. Thank you. Quentin was watching her, an odd expression on his face. Suits you, he said simply. Something in his tone made Hannah's pulse quicken. She turned away from the mirror, suddenly very aware of the thin nightgown she wore and the impropriety of their situation. We should get some rest, she said, moving to the far bed. Quentin nodded, clearing his throat. I'll take the chair, keep watch. Don't be ridiculous, Hannah protested. You need sleep too, the door's locked. We'll be fine. After a moment's hesitation, Quentin relented. He removed his boots and vest but kept the rest of his clothes on as he stretched out on the other bed, his gun within easy reach. Hannah blew out the lamp and crawled under the covers. In the darkness, she could hear Quentin's steady breathing. It was strange to be in a room with a man who wasn't her father, stranger still that she felt safe rather than scandalized. Quentin, she whispered. Thank you for everything. There was a pause before he replied. Get some sleep, Hannah. Long day tomorrow. Hannah closed her eyes, but sleep was slow to come. Her mind was filled with images of her father, of the ranch, of the men who had destroyed her life. But alongside those dark thoughts was the memory of Quentin's strong hands cutting her hair, the warmth in his blue eyes when he'd said the new style suited her, the sense of security she felt in his presence. She didn't understand the feelings stirring within her, didn't want to examine them too closely. For now, it was enough to know that she wasn't alone. Tomorrow they would continue their journey, playing the roles of husband and wife. Hannah told herself it was merely a practical deception, nothing more. But as she drifted toward sleep, Hannah wondered if perhaps fate had a strange way of bringing people together, two souls wounded by the same enemy, finding in each other something neither had been looking for. The morning came too quickly. Hannah woke to find Quentin already up and dressed, his saddlebags packed. Sun's almost up, he said when he noticed her stirring. Mrs. Tanner's fixing us breakfast to take along. We should be on the road within the hour. Hannah nodded, gathering her few belongings. She dressed quickly in the new clothes Quentin had purchased for her, a simple brown skirt, white blouse, and sturdy boots. The outfit was practical and plain, nothing like the colorful dresses she'd worn at home. I stopped by the general store when it opened, Quentin explained. Got us some supplies and these. He held out a small wooden box. Inside were two simple gold bands, wedding rings. Hannah looked up at him, her heart beating a little faster. You've thought of everything. Just being thorough. Quentin took one of the rings and slid it onto her finger. His touch was gentle, his calloused fingertips brushing against her skin. "There, now you're Mrs. Zachary." The words sent an unexpected thrill through Hannah. She watched as Quentin put on the matching ring, his expression unreadable. "Ready?" he asked. Hannah nodded, unable to find her voice for a moment. This was just a ruse, she reminded herself. A necessary deception for their safety, nothing more. They left the boarding house after a quick breakfast, thanking Mrs. Tanner for her hospitality. The woman gave Hannah a knowing smile as they departed. "Safe travels, Mr. and Mrs. Zachary. Hope you find what you're looking for in Denver." Outside, the town was just coming to life. They collected Quentin's horse from the livery and set off, once again riding double. This time, however, Hannah was more aware of Quentin's arms around her, of the solid warmth of his chest against her back. The gold band on her finger caught the morning light, a strange reminder of their pretend marriage. They rode southwest as planned, avoiding the main trails, keeping to the less traveled routes that Quentin seemed to know well. By midday, they had left Miller's Creek far behind, the landscape opening up around them into vast stretches of prairie dotted with small stands of cottonwood and willow near the creek beds. "How far to the next town?" Hannah asked during a brief stop to rest the horse. "A good 2 days' ride," Quentin replied, scanning the horizon with practiced eyes. "There's a line shack about 10 miles from here where we can spend the night. Used to belong to the Bar T Ranch before they went under." Hannah nodded, taking a drink from the canteen he offered. "And after that?" "How long to Denver?" "Couple weeks, if the weather holds and we don't run into trouble." Quentin's expression darkened. "Speaking of which, we should keep moving. Don't like being out in the open like this." They mounted up again and continued their journey. The day grew warmer, the sun beating down on them with the full force of late summer. Hannah's new shorter hair kept her neck cooler, and she was grateful for the practical clothes Quentin had chosen. As they rode, Hannah found herself wondering about the man behind her. He'd told her about losing his ranch to Blackwell, but little else about himself. Was there a woman waiting for him somewhere? Had there ever been? What would he do once they reached Denver? The questions swirled in her mind, but she held them back. Their relationship, such as it was, existed purely out of necessity. Once they reached Denver, Quentin would likely continue on his way, and she would start her new life with her aunt. The thought brought an unexpected pang of sadness. Late in the afternoon, they crested a small rise and Quentin reined in the horse suddenly. Hannah followed his gaze to a plume of dust in the distance. "Riders," he said tersely. 4, maybe 5. Hannah's heart raced. Blackwell's men could be just travelers. Quentin scanned the terrain quickly. "No cover here, we'll have to make a run for it." He turned the horse sharply, urging it into a gallop toward a distant line of trees that marked a creek bed. Hannah held on tightly as they raced across the open prairie, the sound of thundering hooves filling her ears. A shout behind them confirmed Quentin's suspicions. The riders had spotted them and were giving chase. "Hang on," Quentin yelled above the wind, pushing his horse harder. They reached the trees just as the first shots rang out. Quentin guided the horse through the tangled undergrowth, branches whipping past them as they descended into the creek bed. The water was low this time of year, allowing them to cross quickly and continue up the other side. More shots echoed behind them, but the trees provided some cover. Quentin kept the horse at a dead run, following the line of the creek for several hundred yards before cutting back toward the open prairie on the other side. "Where are we going?" Hannah gasped, clinging to him as they galloped across the uneven ground. "Line shacks not far," Quentin replied grimly. "Better defensible position than out here." The horse was tiring, its coat dark with sweat, but Quentin pushed it onward. The riders behind them had been momentarily confused by their change in direction, but were now back on their trail. As the sun began to set, Hannah spotted a small structure in the distance, a crude cabin nestled against a rocky outcropping. The line shack. They reached it just as darkness was falling. Quentin practically lifted Hannah from the saddle and pushed her toward the door while he quickly led the exhausted horse around to the back. The interior of the shack was sparse but intact, a small table and chair, a narrow cot against one wall, a stone fireplace, and a few shelves holding basic supplies left by previous occupants. Quentin joined her moments later, barring the door behind him. "Horse is hidden," he said, moving to the single window to peer out. "They're still coming, but they'll lose our trail in the dark." Hannah sank onto the cot, her legs trembling from the long ride and the fear. "They found us. How did they find us?" "That salesman, most likely," Quentin said, checking his revolver. "Recognized you and talked to the wrong person." He glanced at her pale face. "Don't worry, this place is hard to spot in daylight, let alone at night. We'll lie low until morning, then head out before dawn." Hannah nodded, trying to believe him. She watched as Quentin moved efficiently around the small space, checking supplies, securing the window, laying out his weapons. There was something reassuring about his calm competence. "Are you always so prepared?" she asked, trying to distract herself from her fear. Quentin paused, a ghost of a smile crossing his face. "Comes with the territory, been on my own a long time. You learn to think ahead or you don't survive." "How long?" Hannah asked. "Since you lost your ranch, I mean." "Almost a year." Quentin sat down at the small table, keeping his gun within reach. "Feels longer, and before that, did you have?" "Family." Quentin was quiet for a moment. "Had a wife once, Sarah. She died in childbirth 6 years ago, baby too." Hannah's heart ached for him. "I'm sorry." He shrugged, but she could see the old pain in his eyes. "Life out here is hard on women. Your mother, influenza, when I was 15. Hannah twisted the fake wedding ring on her finger. "It was just me and Pa after that. We managed." They fell into silence, each lost in their own memories. Outside, the night deepened, the sounds of their pursuers fading into the distance. Eventually, Quentin spoke again. "You should get some sleep. I'll keep watch." Hannah knew she should protest, insist on taking a turn, but exhaustion was overtaking her. She lay down on the narrow cot, pulling a rough blanket over herself. "What about you?" she asked, watching as Quentin positioned himself by the window, rifle across his knees. "I'll be fine. Used to going without sleep." Hannah wanted to say more, to thank him again for risking his life for her, a woman he barely knew, but the words seemed inadequate. Instead, she said, "Wake me if you need me." Quentin nodded, his attention already focused on the darkness outside. Hannah closed her eyes, listening to the sound of his steady breathing, and despite the danger lurking beyond the walls, she felt safe. She dreamed of her father that night, of their ranch, of the life they'd built together. But in the dream, the ranch wasn't burning. Instead, it was whole and thriving, with cattle grazing in the pastures and smoke rising peacefully from the chimney. And standing on the porch beside her wasn't her father, but Quentin, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled at her. Hannah woke with a start, confused by the unfamiliar surroundings. The line shack was dark except for a faint glow from the dying embers in the fireplace. Quentin was still at his post by the window, his silhouette outlined against the pale pre-dawn light. "You're awake," he said, turning to look at her. "Good, we should move soon." Hannah sat up, pushing away the lingering images of her dream. "Did you sleep at all?" "Dozed a bit." Quentin stood, stretching his tall frame. "No sign of them since midnight. Think we lost them for now, but they'll be searching at first light." They prepared to leave quickly, gathering their few supplies. Hannah noticed Quentin moving stiffly, favoring his left arm. "You're hurt," she said, stepping closer to examine him. "It's nothing. Bullet grazed me during the chase yesterday." He tried to brush it off, but Hannah insisted on looking. The sleeve of his shirt was torn, revealing a shallow but angry-looking wound across his upper arm. "This needs cleaning," Hannah said firmly. "Sit down." To her surprise, Quentin obeyed without argument. Hannah found a canteen and some clean rags in his saddlebags. She worked quickly, washing the wound and binding it with strips of cloth. "You've done this before," Quentin observed as she tied off the bandage. "Pa got himself into scrapes often enough," Hannah replied. "Had to learn to patch him up." Her fingers lingered on his arm, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the moment. Quentin's skin was warm beneath her touch, his muscles solid. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a current of awareness that had nothing to do with their pretend marriage. Hannah pulled away first, busying herself with packing up the remaining supplies. "We should go," she said, her voice not quite steady. Quentin cleared his throat. Right. They left the lined shack as the first rays of sun were breaking over the horizon. Quentin had decided they would travel on foot for a while, leading the horse to conserve its strength and make less noise. They kept to the rocky ground near the base of a ridge where they would leave fewer tracks. The day grew hot quickly, the sun beating down mercilessly from a cloudless sky. Hannah was grateful for the canteen Quentin shared with her at regular intervals, making sure she stayed hydrated. By midday, they had covered several miles, staying well away from the main trails. Quentin seemed to know the land intimately, guiding them through ravines and dry washes that offered both cover and easier passage. "How do you know this area so well?" Hannah asked during a brief rest in the shade of an overhanging rock. "Worked as a scout for the army years back," Quentin replied, scanning the horizon with narrowed eyes. "Spent a lot of time in these parts tracking renegade bands. You learn to read the land." Hannah studied him with new appreciation. There was clearly more to Quentin Zachary than he let on. "What made you decide to settle down and start ranching?" A shadow crossed his face. "Met Sarah, wanted something more permanent than drifting from post to post." He fell silent for a moment. Guess it wasn't meant to be permanent after all. Hannah reached out impulsively and touched his hand. "I'm sorry." Quentin looked down at her hand on his, then back at her face. Something in his expression made Hannah's heart beat faster. For a moment, she thought he might say something, might acknowledge whatever was growing between them. Instead, he stood abruptly. "We should keep moving." "Want to reach the Johnson Creek crossing before dark?" Hannah nodded, pushing aside the disappointment that rose in her chest. This wasn't the time or place for romantic notions. They were running for their lives, nothing more. And yet, as they continued their journey, Hannah found herself watching Quentin, the set of his shoulders, the way he moved with confident grace across the difficult terrain, the careful attention he paid to their surroundings. He was a man who had suffered loss, just as she had, but hadn't allowed it to break him. They reached Johnson Creek as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the water. The creek was shallow enough to cross easily, but wide enough to provide a natural barrier. On the far side, a stand of cottonwoods offered shelter for the night. Quentin helped Hannah across the slippery rocks, his hand steady under her elbow. Once on the other side, he quickly set about making a small, nearly smokeless fire while Hannah tended to the horse. "No coffee tonight," Quentin said as they settled down with a meal of jerky and hardtack. Smoke might be seen for miles. Hannah nodded, accepting the cold food gratefully. They ate in comfortable silence, the sounds of the creek and night insects creating a peaceful backdrop. It was almost possible to forget they were being hunted. "Tell me about your aunt in Denver," Quentin said after a while. Hannah smiled, the mention of her aunt bringing back fond memories. "Aunt Eliza, she's my mother's sister, married a banker and moved to Denver years ago. She used to visit us every summer until her husband passed. Haven't seen her in 3 years now, but we write. She'll take you in." "Yes," Hannah said confidently. "She's always telling me to come visit, says a young woman needs more society than our ranch could provide." Her smile faded. "She'll be heartbroken about Pa," Quentin nodded, his expression somber. "Family's important. Good that you have someone waiting for you." The way he said it reminded Hannah that Quentin had no one. When they reached Denver, he would truly be alone again. The thought troubled her more than it should have. "What will you do?" she asked quietly. "After Denver, I mean." Quentin poked at the small fire with a stick. "Haven't thought that far ahead, been living day to day for so long." "You could stay," Hannah suggested, then blushed at her own boldness. "In Denver, I mean, winter's coming. It's a good place to wait out the snow." Quentin looked at her, his expression unreadable in the flickering firelight. "Maybe, depends on what happens between here and there." The words hung between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Hannah wanted to ask what he meant, but something in his face stopped her. Instead, she said, "I should sleep. Will you wake me for my watch this time?" Quentin's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "Second half of the night." "I promise." Hannah settled down near the fire, using her rolled-up coat as a pillow. As she drifted toward sleep, she was aware of Quentin's gaze on her, watchful and protective. The fake wedding ring on her finger caught the firelight, gleaming gold against her skin. It was just a prop, a part of their disguise. But as she fell asleep, Hannah wondered what it would be like if it were real. True to his word, Quentin woke Hannah for the second watch. The night was clear and cool, the stars brilliant overhead. Hannah sat with her back against a tree, rifle across her lap, alert for any sound that might indicate pursuit. Quentin slept nearby, his features relaxed in a way they never were when he was awake. Hannah found herself studying him, the strong line of his jaw, the slight crease between his brows that not even sleep could entirely smooth away, the way his hair fell across his forehead. In the stillness of the night, Hannah allowed herself to acknowledge the feelings that had been growing since their first meeting. Quentin Zachary was unlike any man she had ever known. He was strong yet gentle, capable yet vulnerable in his own way. He had come to her aid without hesitation, risking his life for a stranger. And somewhere along their journey, he had become far more than just her protector. The realization should have frightened her. Instead, it brought a strange sense of peace. Whatever happened in the days ahead, Hannah knew that meeting Quentin had changed her life in ways that went beyond their current circumstances. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky with pale light, Hannah reluctantly woke Quentin. They broke camp quickly and continued their journey, staying to the less traveled routes, always watchful for signs of pursuit. The next few days fell into a pattern, traveling by day, making camp in hidden places by night, sharing watches and simple meals. They encountered no one, which was both a relief and a concern. The absence of Blackwell's men could mean they had lost interest or were simply regrouping for a more concentrated search. On the fourth day after leaving the line shack, they came upon a small settlement, little more than a trading post, a blacksmith, and a handful of cabins clustered around a crossroads. Silver Junction, Quentin told her as they observed from a distance. Not much of a place, but they'll have supplies we need. Is it safe? Hannah asked, nervously adjusting the scarf she wore over her shortened hair. Safe as anywhere, Quentin replied. Remember, you're my wife. We're headed to Denver to visit family. Nothing unusual about that. Hannah nodded, touching the wedding band on her finger. After days of playing the role, it was becoming almost second nature to think of herself as Mrs. Zachary. The thought brought both comfort and a twinge of sadness, knowing it was all pretense. They rode into town together, Quentin's arm around her waist in a gesture that could have been protective or affectionate. To anyone watching, they would appear to be a normal married couple, if somewhat trail-worn. The trading post was their first stop. While Quentin haggled with the proprietor over supplies, Hannah browsed the meager selection of goods. A small display of ribbons caught her eye, simple luxuries she hadn't thought about in days. See something you like? Quentin asked, coming to stand beside her. Hannah smiled, embarrassed to be caught looking at such frivolous items. Just remembering, my mother used to wear ribbons in her hair on Sundays. Without comment, Quentin selected a blue ribbon that matched Hannah's eyes and added it to their purchases. The small gesture touched her deeply. As they left the trading post, a commotion at the other end of the settlement drew their attention. A group of riders was approaching, dust rising beneath their horses' hooves. Get to the blacksmith's, Quentin said quietly, his hand moving to the gun at his hip. Don't look back. Hannah hurried across the street, her heart pounding. Through the open door of the blacksmith shop, she watched as the riders entered the settlement. There were 6 of them, rough-looking men with the hard eyes of those who lived by violence. The leader, a tall man with a shock of red hair, dismounted in front of the trading post. Hannah couldn't hear what was said, but she saw him hand something to the proprietor, a paper of some kind. The man studied it, then pointed in the direction of the blacksmith shop. Quentin, Hannah whispered urgently as he joined her. They're asking about us. Quentin's expression hardened. Back door, he said, nodding toward the rear of the shop. Now. They slipped out just as the riders approached the blacksmith's. Their own horse was still tethered out front, but there was no time to retrieve it. Keeping to the shadows between buildings, they made their way to the edge of the settlement. There, a voice shouted behind them. By the cooper's shed, shots rang out, splintering wood near Hannah's head. Quentin pulled her down behind a water trough as bullets whizzed overhead. "Run for those trees," he told her, drawing his revolver. "I'll cover you." "Not without you," Hannah protested. "I'll be right behind you," Quentin promised. "Go." Hannah hesitated only a moment before running toward the stand of pines at the edge of the settlement. Behind her, she heard Quentin's gun firing, the answering shots from their pursuers. She reached the trees and turned, her heart in her throat. Quentin was backing toward her, firing methodically, keeping the men pinned down behind various obstacles. Just as he reached the edge of the trees, Hannah saw him stumble, his hand going to his side. "You're hit," she cried, rushing to support him. "Keep going," Quentin gasped, leaning heavily against her. "Not safe here." They staggered deeper into the woods, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind them. After what seemed like miles but was probably only a few hundred yards, Quentin collapsed against a fallen log, his face ashen. "Let me see," Hannah demanded, pulling his hand away from his side. Blood was spreading across his shirt, dark and alarming. "Just a graze," Quentin tried to assure her, but the pain in his eyes told a different story. Hannah tore open his shirt, revealing a wound just above his hip. The bullet had passed through, which was both good and bad. No need to dig out a slug, but twice the bleeding to contend with. Working quickly, Hannah used strips torn from her petticoat to bind the wound, applying pressure to stop the bleeding. Quentin watched her, his breathing labored but steady. "You're getting good at this," he said, attempting a smile that turned into a grimace. "Hush," Hannah replied, concentrating on her task. "Save your strength." Once the bleeding had slowed, Hannah sat back on her heels, surveying their situation. They were in dense woods with no clear trail. Their horse, supplies, and most of their money were back in Silver Junction. Quentin was injured, and Blackwell's men were surely still searching for them. "We need shelter," she said, thinking aloud, "and clean water for your wound." Quentin nodded toward the west. "There's a line of hills about 2 miles that way. Might be caves, at least some rocky overhangs for shelter." Hannah helped him to his feet, supporting him as best she could. Quentin was a large man, solid with muscle, and she staggered under his weight. But determination lent her strength, and slowly, painfully, they began to move in the direction he had indicated. The journey was arduous. Quentin tried to carry his own weight, but Hannah could see the effort it cost him. His face grew paler, his steps less certain. By the time they reached the first of the low hills, the sun was setting, and Quentin was barely conscious. Fortune favored them. At the base of the hills, Hannah found a small cave, really more of a deep recess in the rock face, but enough to provide shelter from the elements and prying eyes. A trickle of water ran down one wall, collecting in a small pool before continuing on its way underground. With the last of his strength, Quentin helped Hannah gather branches and leaves to create a makeshift bed. He collapsed onto it, his breathing shallow and rapid. "Rest," Hannah told him, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. "I'll keep watch." For the first time since they'd met, their roles were reversed. Now it was Hannah who protected Quentin, who tended his wounds, who listened anxiously for sounds of pursuit. As darkness fell, she ventured out only briefly to gather wood for a small, well-hidden fire. By the flickering light, she examined Quentin's wound again. It was red and hot to the touch, the beginnings of infection setting in. Hannah used water from the pool to clean it as best she could, then applied a poultice of crushed pine needles, a remedy her mother had taught her long ago. Throughout the night, Quentin drifted in and out of consciousness. During his lucid moments, he insisted that Hannah should go on without him, continue to Denver alone. Each time, she refused more adamantly. "I'm not leaving you," she told him firmly, "so stop suggesting it." In his feverish state, Quentin spoke of things he might never have revealed otherwise: his childhood on a farm in Missouri, his time as an Army scout, the joy he'd felt when he first saw his own ranch, the devastation of losing Sarah and their child. Hannah listened, her heart aching for all he had endured. She bathed his fevered brow, changed his bandages, and spoke soothingly when nightmares made him thrash and call out. In the darkest hours before dawn, when Quentin's fever was at its worst, he caught Hannah's hand in a surprisingly strong grip. "Hannah," he said, his blue eyes bright with fever but lucid, "If I don't make it, don't talk like that," she interrupted fiercely. "You're going to be fine." "Listen to me," Quentin insisted. "If I don't make it, I want you to know, meeting you was worth it, all of it." Hannah felt tears sting her eyes. "Quentin, I never thought I'd feel this way again," he continued, his voice growing weaker. "After Sarah, I thought that part of me was dead. But you brought it back to life." Before Hannah could respond, Quentin's eyes closed and he fell into an exhausted sleep. She sat beside him, holding his hand, her thoughts in turmoil. Had he meant what he said, or was it just the fever talking? And what of her own feelings, which grew stronger with each passing day? As the first light of dawn filtered into the cave, Hannah made a decision. Quentin needed medicine, real medicine, not just pine needles and prayer. The nearest town was Silver Junction, where Blackwell's men had nearly caught them. But it was also their only hope. She waited until Quentin was sleeping peacefully, his fever having broken sometime in the night. Then she wrote a brief note explaining her plan and left it where he would see it when he woke. Taking his gun and what little money she had, Hannah set out for Silver Junction. The journey back was quicker without having to support Quentin, but still treacherous. Hannah kept to the woods, moving as quietly as she could, constantly alert for signs of Blackwell's men. By mid-morning, she could see the settlement in the distance. Caution made her circle around to approach from the opposite direction from where they had fled. The settlement seemed quiet, no sign of the riders who had chased them. Still, Hannah kept her scarf pulled low over her face as she entered the trading post. The proprietor looked up as the bell over the door jingled. "Help you, madam?" "I need laudanum," Hannah said, keeping her voice low. "And bandages, my husband's been hurt." The man's eyes narrowed slightly. "Husband hurt bad, is he? What happened?" Hannah had prepared her story. "Hunting accident, fell and got caught on his own knife." She placed money on the counter. "Please, I don't have much time." Perhaps it was the genuine worry in her voice, or perhaps the man simply didn't care enough to press further. He gathered the requested items, adding a small tin of salve. "For infection," he explained gruffly. "No extra charge." Hannah thanked him, tucking the supplies into a small sack he provided. As she turned to leave, the man called after her. "Those men who were looking for a couple yesterday, they rode out at first light, said something about checking the trail south." Hannah's heart skipped a beat. Was he warning her or fishing for information? "I wouldn't know about that," she said carefully. "We're headed west ourselves." The man nodded slowly. "West, huh? Good country out that way." Outside, Hannah spotted their horse tied up at the blacksmith's. It was a risk, but one worth taking. Moving casually, she approached the animal, speaking softly to it as she untied the reins. "That your horse, madam?" the blacksmith asked, emerging from his shop. Hannah tensed, ready to run, but the man's expression was merely curious, not suspicious. "Yes," she replied. "My husband and I were here yesterday. We had to leave rather suddenly." The blacksmith scratched his beard. "Thought it might been cared for, if you're wondering. Figured someone would come back for it." Relief flooded through Hannah. "Thank you. How much do I owe you for the feed and care?" The man waved her off. "Consider it a favor. Times are hard enough without charging folks for basic decency." He hesitated, then added, "Those men who were asking after you and your husband, they didn't seem the friendly sort." Hannah stiffened. "What did you tell them?" "That I hadn't seen anyone matching their description," the blacksmith replied calmly. "Wasn't hard to figure out they meant no good. My pa always said to mind my own business when trouble's brewing." Hannah's gratitude was overwhelming. "Thank you," she said simply. The blacksmith nodded. "Best be on your way, madam. They said they'd be back by sundown to check again." Hannah mounted quickly, turning the horse toward the western edge of the settlement. As she rode, she kept expecting shouts of alarm, shots fired, but nothing disrupted the quiet morning. It seemed that Silver Junction, or at least some of its residents, had chosen to look the other way. The ride back to the cave seemed to take forever. Hannah pushed the horse as much as she dared, worry for Quentin gnawing at her. What if his condition had worsened while she was gone? What if Blackwell's men had somehow tracked them to the cave? When she finally reached the hillside, Hannah approached cautiously, alert for any signs of danger. The cave appeared undisturbed, and when she entered, she found Quentin awake, propped up against the wall, her note crumpled in his hand. "You shouldn't have gone," he said by way of greeting, his voice hoarse but stronger than it had been the night before. "And you shouldn't be sitting up," Hannah countered, kneeling beside him. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been shot," Quentin replied dryly, "but better than yesterday." His expression softened. "I was worried about you." Hannah busied herself with unpacking the supplies, hiding the emotion his words stirred in her. "I got medicine, bandages, and our horse." She handed him the laudanum. "Take this, it will help with the pain." Quentin grimaced at the bitter taste but swallowed it without complaint. While they waited for the medicine to take effect, Hannah told him about her trip to Silver Junction, the kindness of the blacksmith, the warning about Blackwell's men returning by sundown. "We can't stay here," Quentin said, struggling to sit up straighter. "It's too close to the settlement." "You're in no condition to travel far," Hannah protested, Quentin's jaw set in a stubborn line. "I've ridden with worse." Seeing her skeptical expression, he added, "We'll take it slow. But we need to put some distance between us and Silver Junction before those men come back." Hannah knew he was right. She helped him change into the clean shirt she'd retrieved from his saddlebags, then carefully rebandaged his wound with the proper supplies. The laudanum had taken effect, dulling the pain enough for Quentin to move with Hannah's support. Getting him onto the horse was a struggle that left them both breathless, but finally Quentin was mounted, with Hannah behind him to keep him steady. They set off at a gentle pace, heading west into terrain that grew increasingly rugged. "Where are we going?" Hannah asked, her arms around Quentin's waist, careful to avoid his wound. "There's a place," Quentin replied, his voice tight with the effort of staying upright. "Old trapper's cabin about 10 miles from here. Used it once when I was scouting, isolated, hard to find if you don't know it's there." They rode through the day, stopping frequently for Quentin to rest. Hannah could feel him leaning more heavily against her as the hours passed, his strength flagging despite his determination. By late afternoon, when they finally reached a narrow valley nestled between two ridges, Quentin was barely conscious. The cabin was exactly as he had described, small, isolated, nearly invisible among the pines that surrounded it. It was primitive but solid, with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table and chair, and a narrow bed built into one wall. Hannah helped Quentin inside and onto the bed, alarmed by how pale he had become during their journey. She worked quickly to start a fire, boil water for tea, and prepare another dose of laudanum. As she tended to him, cleaning his wound again and applying the salve, Hannah found herself studying Quentin's face. Even exhausted and in pain, there was a strength to his features that she found compelling. His eyes, when they opened to look at her, held a warmth that had nothing to do with fever. "Thank you," he said softly, catching her hand as she adjusted his blanket. Hannah squeezed his fingers gently. "Rest now, we're safe here." As darkness fell, Hannah sat by the fire, keeping watch over Quentin's sleeping form. Outside, a gentle rain began to fall, drumming on the cabin's roof. The sound was soothing, creating a sense of coziness that belied their precarious situation. For the first time in days, Hannah allowed herself to truly think about the future. If they made it to Denver, what then? Would Quentin simply deliver her to her aunt and continue on his way? The thought brought an ache to her chest that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. In the short time they had known each other, Quentin had become more than just her protector. He had become someone she cared for deeply, someone she couldn't imagine leaving behind. But did he feel the same way? His fevered confession might have been just that word spoken in delirium, not to be taken to heart. Hannah twisted the fake wedding band on her finger, watching as it caught the firelight. Playing Quentin's wife had begun as a necessary deception, but somewhere along the way, the line between pretense and reality had blurred. When had she started thinking of herself as Hannah Zachary, not just in name but in heart? The rain continued through the night, a natural barrier between them and any pursuers. Hannah dozed in the chair, waking frequently to check on Quentin. By morning, his fever was gone completely and his color was better. "You look like you've been through a war," he told her when he woke to find her dozing in the uncomfortable chair. Hannah smiled tiredly. "You're one to talk." Quentin pushed himself up to a sitting position, wincing but managing the movement with more ease than the day before. "Come here," he said, patting the edge of the bed. Hannah moved to sit beside him, suddenly shy in a way she hadn't been even when tending his wounds. "I remember what I said," Quentin told her, his blue eyes serious. "Last night when the fever was high, I remember all of it." Hannah's heart raced. "You were delirious." "I was honest," Quentin countered, "more honest than I've let myself be in a long time." He took her hand, his thumb brushing over the gold band she still wore. "This was just for show at first, a way to keep you safe." "I know," Hannah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But somewhere along the way it started to feel real to me." Quentin's gaze held her steadily. "You started to feel real to me, not just someone I was protecting, but someone I was coming to care for, deeply." Hannah felt tears well in her eyes. "Quentin, I know the timing's all wrong," he continued. "We're being hunted. I'm half laid up with a bullet wound, and we barely know each other." "I think we know each other better than most couples who have courted for months," Hannah said, finding her voice. "When you're fighting for your lives together, you learn the things that matter." Quentin's expression softened. "And what matters to you, Hannah Jenkins?" Hannah looked down at their joined hands, gathering her courage. "Honesty, strength, kindness, the way you've protected me without making me feel helpless, the way you listen when I speak." She met his gaze again. "You matter to me, Quentin, more than I thought possible in such a short time." The smile that spread across Quentin's face transformed it, easing the lines of pain and worry. "Then I'm the luckiest man in the Wyoming Territory." He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. Hannah didn't. Instead, she closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened into something more. When they finally broke apart, both breathing a little faster, Quentin rested his forehead against hers. "When we get to Denver," he said softly, "if you still feel this way, would you consider making this real?" He touched the ring on her finger. Hannah's heart soared. "Are you proposing to me, Quentin Zachary?" "Seems I am," he replied, a smile in his voice. "Though I always imagined doing it on one knee, not flat on my back with a bullet hole in my side." Hannah laughed, joy bubbling up despite their circumstances. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I would consider it, very seriously." Quentin pulled her close again, his kiss more confident this time, full of promise and hope. For a moment, the danger they faced receded, leaving only the two of them in a world of their own making. Reality intruded all too soon. Quentin needed rest to heal properly, and they still had a long journey ahead of them. Hannah reluctantly pulled away, mindful of his injury. "You should rest," she told him. "We have time." Quentin caught her hand as she stood. "Do we? Blackwell's men are still out there." Hannah squeezed his fingers. "We'll face them together, but first, you need to get your strength back." The days that followed took on a dreamlike quality for Hannah. Isolated in the cabin, with the rain continuing intermittently outside, they existed in a world apart from the danger that had brought them together. Quentin regained his strength gradually, able to move around the small cabin with increasing ease as the days passed. They talked for hours, sharing stories of their lives before they met. Hannah told Quentin about growing up on the ranch, about her mother's gentle wisdom and her father's stubborn determination. Quentin spoke of his time as a scout, the places he had seen, the people he had met. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, sometimes in comfortable silence, sometimes planning their future. Denver was still their destination, but now it represented a beginning rather than an end. "We could start over," Quentin said one night as they shared a simple meal of rabbit stew. "Find a place to build something new." Hannah smiled at the thought. "I'd like that, somewhere with good land, room for a garden. Horses," Quentin added. "I miss having horses of my own." "And children someday," Hannah said softly, a blush coloring her cheeks. Quentin's expression grew tender. "I'd like that very much." As idyllic as their time in the cabin was, they couldn't stay forever. Their supplies were limited, and the threat of Blackwell's men still loomed. On the fifth day, when Quentin was able to move without pain and the weather had cleared, they knew it was time to continue their journey. "Denver's still a week's ride," Quentin said as they packed their few belongings. "We'll need to be careful." Hannah nodded, securing the last of their supplies in the saddlebags. The prospect of leaving the safety of the cabin filled her with apprehension, but she knew they had no choice. "Do you think they're still looking for us?" Quentin's expression was grim. "Blackwell's not the type to give up easily, but we've got a head start and I know trails they won't think to check." They left at first light, Quentin now strong enough to ride normally with Hannah behind him. The morning was crisp and clear, the landscape washed clean by the recent rains. Under different circumstances, it would have been a pleasant journey. For 3 days, they traveled without incident, keeping to less traveled routes, camping in hidden spots at night. Hannah began to hope that perhaps they had truly evaded Blackwell's men, that they might reach Denver without further trouble. On the 4th day, as they were crossing a high meadow, Quentin suddenly reined in the horse, his body tense. "What is it?" Hannah asked, peering around him. "Riders," Quentin said tersely, "coming up from the south." Hannah followed his gaze. In the distance, she could make out a group of horsemen moving at a steady pace toward them. Blackwell. "Can't tell from here," Quentin replied, already turning their horse toward a stand of trees at the edge of the meadow. "But we're not waiting to find out." They reached the cover of the trees just as the riders came into clear view. There were 5 of them, and even at a distance, Hannah recognized the red-haired leader from Silver Junction. "It's them," she whispered, fear clutching at her heart. Quentin dismounted quickly, helping Hannah down. "We need to split up," he said, his voice low and urgent. "They've spotted the horse. I'll lead them away. You head west through these trees. There's a ravine about half a mile that way. Follow it north until you reach a fork, then take the right branch. It leads to a settler's cabin, family name of Wilkins, good people, they'll help you." "No," Hannah protested, clutching his arm, "I won't leave you." Quentin cupped her face in his hands. "Hannah, listen to me, I can't outride them with both of us on the horse. This is our best chance." "They'll kill you," Hannah said, tears filling her eyes. "Not if I can help it," Quentin replied with a grim smile. He pulled her close for a fierce kiss. "I'll find you, I promise." Before Hannah could argue further, Quentin mounted the horse and rode out from the trees, deliberately making himself visible to the approaching riders. As she had feared, they immediately changed course to pursue him. Hannah watched, her heart in her throat, as Quentin led them on a chase across the meadow and into the hills beyond. Only when they had disappeared from sight did she turn and begin moving in the direction he had indicated. The journey through the forest was difficult. Hannah kept to the densest parts, away from any trails, constantly looking over her shoulder. The sound of distant gunfire made her freeze in her tracks, terror gripping her heart. Had they caught Quentin? Was he lying somewhere, bleeding or worse? She forced herself to keep moving. Quentin had sacrificed himself to give her a chance to escape. She couldn't waste it. The ravine was where he had said it would be, a deep cut in the earth with a small stream running along its bottom. Hannah followed it northward, her legs aching, her mind filled with worst-case scenarios. By nightfall, she reached the fork Quentin had described. Taking the right branch as instructed, Hannah continued on, though exhaustion made each step a struggle. The settler's cabin appeared just as she was beginning to fear she had somehow missed it, a sturdy log structure with smoke rising from its chimney, a welcome sight in the gathering darkness. A woman was in the yard, gathering in laundry from a line strung between 2 trees. She looked up as Hannah approached, her expression wary until she saw it was a lone woman, obviously in distress. "Help," Hannah called, her voice breaking. "Please." The woman hurried to her side, supporting her as Hannah's legs finally gave out. "Thomas," she called toward the cabin. "Come quickly." A tall man appeared in the doorway, then rushed forward to help his wife bring Hannah inside. They settled her in a chair by the fire, the woman wrapping a blanket around her shoulders while the man fetched a cup of water. "What happened to you, miss?" the woman asked, her kind face creased with concern. Hannah took a shaky breath. "My name is Hannah Jenkins. Quentin Zachary sent me. We were being chased by Blackwell's men. He led them away to give me a chance to escape." The couple exchanged glances. "Zach sent you?" the man, Thomas, asked. "Tall fellow, blue eyes, scar along his jaw." Hannah nodded eagerly. "You know him. He helped us when we first settled here," the woman explained. "Showed Thomas where to find game, helped build our root cellar." Good man. Relief washed over Hannah. She had found the right place, people who knew and trusted Quentin. He told me to come here, that you would help, but he's out there and Blackwell's men are after him. Thomas's expression hardened. Blackwell, that snake's been causing trouble all through these parts. He turned to his wife. Mary, get some food for Miss Jenkins. I'll saddle the horses. You're going after him? Hannah asked, hope rising in her chest. Not alone, Thomas replied. Got neighbors about 3 miles east, good men who don't take kindly to Blackwell's type. We'll find your friend. Hannah rose unsteadily to her feet. I'm coming with you. Mary placed a gentle but firm hand on her shoulder. You're exhausted, dear. Best thing you can do for Quentin is rest and be ready when they bring him back. Hannah wanted to argue, but she knew the woman was right. She could barely stand, let alone ride out on a search party. Reluctantly, she sank back into the chair. Thomas left to gather the other settlers, while Mary prepared a simple but hearty meal. Hannah ate mechanically, her mind with Quentin. The sound of the gunfire kept echoing in her memory. How long have you known Quentin? Mary asked, clearly trying to distract her. Despite her worry, Hannah found herself smiling. Not long, but long enough. She twisted the gold band on her finger. We're to be married when we reach Denver. Mary's eyes crinkled warmly. I thought it might be something like that, the way you say his name. She reached across the table to pat Hannah's hand. He'll be all right. Quentin Zachary's not a man who's easy to kill. Hannah clung to that reassurance as the night wore on. Thomas returned with 4 other men, all armed and determined to find Quentin and deal with Blackwell's gang once and for all. They rode out into the darkness, promising to return by dawn. Mary insisted that Hannah take their son's bed. He's off to school in Laramie, she explained. Rooms just sitting empty. Exhaustion finally overcame worry, and Hannah fell into a deep sleep. She dreamed of Quentin not wounded or in danger, but standing beside her on the porch of a house that was somehow both familiar and new, his arm around her waist, his smile full of love and promise. The sound of horses approaching woke her. Hannah bolted upright, disoriented for a moment before remembering where she was and why. She rushed to the window, heart pounding. In the gray light of dawn, she could make out several riders approaching the cabin. Thomas was in the lead, and beside him, slumped in the saddle but clearly alive, was Quentin. Hannah ran outside, heedless of her disheveled appearance or the morning chill. Quentin dismounted slowly, favoring his left leg, but his face lit up when he saw her. Told you I'd find you, he said as she flung herself into his arms. Hannah couldn't speak, could only hold him tightly, her face pressed against his chest, feeling his heart beat strong and steady beneath her cheek. Didn't think you could get rid of me that easily, did you? Quentin murmured into her hair. Hannah pulled back enough to look up at him. Don't ever do that again, she said fiercely. We face things together from now on. Promise me. Quentin's expression softened. I promise. He looked over at Thomas and the other men. Wouldn't have made it without them. They found me just in time. Thomas shrugged off the gratitude. Blackwell's boys scattered once they saw they were outnumbered. Caught 2 of them, though. Sheriff in Laramie will be happy to see them. Mary emerged from the cabin, clucking over Quentin's new injuries, a bullet graze on his thigh, various cuts and bruises. Inside, all of you, she ordered. Breakfast is nearly ready, and I need to tend to that leg. The next few days passed peacefully at the Wilkins cabin. Quentin's injuries were minor compared to the gunshot wound he'd received earlier, and he recovered quickly with Hannah's attentive care. The settlers who had helped rescue him stopped by regularly, bringing news from the surrounding area. Sheriff's got a posse out looking for the rest of Blackwell's gang, one reported. Word is they've fled north toward Montana Territory. The news brought relief, but Hannah and Quentin knew better than to become complacent. As soon as Quentin was well enough to travel, they prepared to continue their journey to Denver. You're welcome to stay longer, Mary told them the night before their departure. Winter's coming on, might be safer to wait it out here. Hannah looked at Quentin, leaving the decision to him. He smiled, taking her hand. Thank you, but we've waited long enough. Time to start our life together. They left at dawn, with Thomas's spare horse for Hannah and fresh supplies provided by the generous settlers. The weather held fair, the days clear and crisp as October gave way to November. They traveled at a steady pace, no longer feeling the urgent need to hide or hurry. On the evening of the 10th day after leaving the Wilkins cabin, they crested a rise and saw Denver spread out before them, a sprawling collection of buildings nestled against the backdrop of the majestic Rocky Mountains. "We made it," Hannah breathed, a sense of wonder filling her. After everything they had endured, it seemed almost miraculous to be looking down at their destination. Quentin reached across to take her hand. Together, they rode into the city the following morning. Denver was larger and more bustling than Hannah had imagined, with brick buildings lining wide streets, carriages and wagons creating a constant flow of traffic, and people from all walks of life going about their business. Finding Aunt Eliza's house proved simpler than expected. She lived in a respectable neighborhood on the west side of the city, her neat two-story home easily identifiable by the well-tended garden Hannah's mother had often described in her letters. Hannah hesitated at the gate, suddenly nervous. What would her aunt think of her appearance of Quentin, of their unconventional courtship? Quentin seemed to sense her anxiety. He squeezed her hand reassuringly. "She's family," he reminded her, "and family's what matters." Taking a deep breath, Hannah opened the gate and walked up the path to the front door, Quentin by her side. She knocked, and after a moment, the door was opened by a plump, gray-haired woman whose features were so like Hannah's mother's that it brought tears to her eyes. "Aunt Eliza," Hannah said, her voice catching. "It's Hannah Jenkins." Eliza's eyes widened in shock, then filled with tears of joy. "Hannah, oh my dear girl," she embraced her niece tightly, then pulled back to look at her properly. "Let me look at you, you're the image of your mother." It was only then that she seemed to notice Quentin standing a respectful distance behind Hannah. Her eyebrows rose questioningly. "This is Quentin Zachary," Hannah said, reaching back to draw him forward. "My fiancé." If Eliza was surprised by this announcement, she hid it well. "Mr. Zachary," she said, extending her hand. "A pleasure to meet you. Please, both of you, come inside. You look as though you've had quite a journey." Over hot tea and fresh-baked scones, Hannah told her aunt everything: her father's death, the flight from the ranch, meeting Quentin, their harrowing journey to Denver. Eliza listened without interruption, her expression shifting from shock to sorrow to admiration. "Your father was a good man," she said when Hannah had finished. "I'm so sorry, my dear," she turned to Quentin. "And you, Mr. Zachary, it seems my niece owes you her life." Quentin shook his head. "It's the other way around, madam. Hannah saved me in more ways than one." The way he looked at Hannah as he spoke told Eliza everything she needed to know about the nature of their relationship. Her expression softened. "Well, you're both welcome to stay here as long as you need, though I assume separate rooms will be necessary until the wedding." Hannah blushed, but Quentin answered smoothly. "Of course, madam, we wouldn't want to cause any gossip." Eliza sniffed. "Gossip is the least of your worries after what you've been through, but propriety must be observed, especially if you're to build a life here in Denver." The days that followed were a time of healing and planning for Hannah and Quentin. Eliza introduced them to her circle of friends, including a banker who offered Quentin a position as a security consultant, and a lawyer who helped Hannah file a claim against Blackwell for the illegal seizure of her father's property. "It may take months or even years," the lawyer warned, "but with the testimony of the settlers who helped you and the 2 gang members now in custody, we have a strong case." Hannah didn't really care about reclaiming the ranch. Her future was with Quentin now, in whatever home they built together. But pursuing justice for her father felt right, a way to honor his memory and ensure that Blackwell paid for his crimes. As winter settled over Denver, bringing snow and bitter cold, Hannah and Quentin's plans for the future took shape. They would be married in the spring when the mountain passes cleared. With the money Quentin earned from his new position, they would buy land outside the city, not a large ranch, but enough for a comfortable home, a garden for Hannah and horses for Quentin. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the first truly warm day of May. Hannah stood in her aunt's bedroom, looking at her reflection in the full-length mirror. Her wedding dress was simple but elegant ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, a gift from Aunt Eliza. Your mother would be so proud, Eliza said, adjusting the veil in Hannah's shorter hair. And your father, too. Hannah smiled, blinking back tears. I wish they could be here. They are, in a way, Eliza assured her. In your heart, in the strength they gave you. She stepped back to admire her handiwork. There, perfect. Are you ready? Hannah nodded, her heart full of love and hope. More than ready. The ceremony was held in Eliza's garden, now blooming with spring flowers. Thomas and Mary Wilkins had made the journey from their homestead to attend, along with several of the men who had helped rescue Quentin. Eliza's friends filled out the small gathering, creating an atmosphere of warmth and celebration. Quentin waited for her beneath an arch of roses, looking more handsome than Hannah had ever seen him in a new suit, his blue eyes bright with emotion as she walked toward him on Eliza's arm. The minister's words washed over Hannah like a blessing, but it was Quentin's voice, strong and sure as he spoke his vows, that filled her heart. When he slipped a real gold band onto her finger, replacing the fake one that had meant so much, Hannah felt tears of joy spill down her cheeks. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the minister declared. Mr. Zachary, you may kiss your bride. Quentin pulled her close, his kiss full of promise and love. Around them, their friends and new family applauded, but Hannah heard only the beating of her heart, perfectly in tune with Quentin's. The celebration that followed was joyous, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the evening. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the garden, Quentin led Hannah away from the festivities to a quiet corner. Happy Mrs. Zachary? He asked, his arms around her waist. Hannah smiled up at him, the name now truly hers in every way. Happier than I ever thought possible. Quentin's expression grew serious. I want you to know something. Everything we went through, losing your father, my ranch, being hunted across the territory, I'd go through it all again if it meant finding you. Hannah reached up to touch his face, tracing the scar along his jawline that had become so dear to her. We found each other when we needed it most. Some might call that chance, but I think it was meant to be. Fate, Quentin agreed, drawing her closer, or maybe just good fortune. Either way, Hannah said, rising on tiptoe to kiss him, I'm grateful for every moment that brought us here. As twilight deepened into night, stars appearing one by one in the velvet sky above Denver, Hannah and Quentin slipped away from the celebration to begin their life together. The past, with its sorrows and dangers, was behind them. Ahead lay a future they would build together, day by day, with the same courage and love that had carried them through their journey. And if, in years to come, their children asked how they met, Hannah would tell them of a night when a woman wept quietly with her head low, and a cowboy sat in silence until she rested against him, the beginning of a love story that had survived against all odds and grown stronger with each challenge overcome. For Hannah and Quentin Zachary, it was just the first chapter in a lifetime of adventures, shared dreams, and abiding love, a love forged in the crucible of adversity and tempered by the healing power of time. In a wild and often unforgiving land, they had found in each other not just safety and comfort, but a home for their hearts.